Okay, so welcome to our presentation. Today we'll be covering the Association of Black Psychologists, the Code of Ethics and Standards. This is an overview of the objectives we'll be covering in our presentation, including purpose and history, principles and standards, resolving conflicts. I'll look at the APA Code of Ethics in comparison to the ABPSI Code of Ethics, and then some information on application. So I'm going to get us started by going over some of the key points in the 2019 Ethical Standards of Black Psychologists, including purpose, history, and an overview of the 7 principles and standards. So I also want to point out that I'll be referring to Kemet and Mott, and Kemet is an African-centered way of looking at Egypt. So I'll kind of cover this a little bit later as well, but we have like a very Eurocentric understanding of what Europe is, and this is a way to bring light of the African history and knowledge that is rooted in Egypt. So when it comes to the purpose of the ethical standards, the authors stated that there is a rational need that exists today as much as it did back in 1983 when they first published the Ethical Standards of Black Psychologists. It was written by doctors Naeem Akbar and Wade Nobles, who said that Black psychology is not just psychology practiced by Black individuals or a study of Black psychological issues, but a study and practice of individuals who are fully committed to the liberation of the African mind from the influence of centuries of racial oppression. Wade Nobles also wrote this beautiful quote, and I can't summarize it succinctly because it loses so much of its power, so I'm just going to read you this quote. Black psychology, as it is being developed, is the self-conscious centering of psychological analyses and the applications in African realities, cultures, and epistemologies. African-centered psychology as a system of thought and action examines the processes that allow for the illumination and liberation of the spirit. Relying on the principles of harmony within the universe as the natural order of existence, African psychology is ultimately concerned with understanding the systems of meaning of being human, the features of human functioning, and the restoration of the normal natural order of human development. Additionally, the role of Black psychologists is to reintroduce the world to this African-centered perspective on ethical thinking. Psychology and ethical knowledge has been overshadowed by Western worldview, which can pit humankind against itself and humankind against environment. The foundational principles of African thought can assist all of humanity in the rediscovery and reawakening of the true nature and purpose. Additionally, enlightened thinking traces back to 4,000 years ago, where ancient Kemites had already created a well-developed, well-conceived, and time-tested moral code based on Ma'at, which is different than what many of us are taught in more of like a Eurocentric framework, which focuses a little bit more on the Greek code of ethics, or how ethics have come from a Greek source. So the concept Ma'at from ancient Kemet means a principle of rightness and order and balance which governs all aspects in the universe. This principle observed that there appeared to be a right order of being that is inerrant in all things that exist. So this can be a right way for a tree to grow, a right way for a person to treat their neighbor, a right time for a tree to grow, a right way for society to be structured. So Ma'at makes it possible for humankind to build a society that is orderly, harmonious, balanced, and morally just. So Black psychology can serve Black psychologists in their own moral and ethical development, and also serve as a model for the larger community. The ethical code for Black psychologists also provides a framework on how Black psychologists could view themselves as professionals, their role within the field, and how they should strive to model ethical behavior for the larger community. So here are the principles and standards. I'll try to briefly go through them so that we can both understand a little bit more about where they come from in terms of African thinking, and then how psychologists can use this practically today. So Order comes from the Mott context, which states that Mott exists when everything is working as it was intended, that there's a good working order. There's a natural right way for all things to be and exist. And the task is for us as psychologists to try and discern what is the right way by carefully following the processes of nature and observing the results, such as learning from experiences in the past. Some behavioral standards that psychologists can do is to cultivate moral character, create a higher consciousness in one's self and society, and to resolve conflicts in a positive and productive way. For truth, we're mandated to seek truth, examine truth, and question much of what we may have come to accept as truth. So we're best served by inviting an open and honest discourse on what stands as truth. This principle also goes to say that truth stands up to scrutiny, and the only failure is in failing to question truth or what we believe to be true, and thereby allowing dogma to escape the test of correspondence to reality. Psychologists should be speaking truth to everyone, engaging in studying research to understand Afrocentric principles to reveal strategies for the liberation of the African mind. And it's psychologists' responsibility to foster self-knowledge, consider the perspective of those being studied, continually confront the myth of racial classification whenever possible. Propriety is doing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time. So acting within the bounds of propriety to serve to create and maintain the right order of Mott. So a lot of these interact with each other using this chemetic knowledge to kind of create propriety, balance, truth, order. So you'll see a lot of overlap here. Ancient wisdom traditions taught that true propriety springs from a compassionate knowledge of the heart of others, which will emit proper behavior for the proper time. Additionally, the author said this is going deeper than the golden rule and is seeking to recognize the sacredness and divinity of every person and treat them likewise. So psychologists should work to respect the worth and dignity of all human beings, refrain from lying, gossip, slander, to understand that every offense directed at one another, even if it's small, damages this overall social and moral fabric of the community. So harmony is required to maintain true and collect alignment within ourselves, our higher purpose, and our responsibility of pursuing self-actualization. Harmony is inspired by the natural world. Ancient Kemetic scientists found that the natural world has these patterns and relationships that would repeat themselves. And so psychologists, we should focus on enriching relationships, demonstrating respect for all human beings, and treating all humans as kin. Balance is equilibrium that nature seeks between complementary forces. So balance is maintained when we attend to all of our responsibilities to the extent needed. When we neglect certain areas, this results in an imbalance, and this can interfere with functioning. Psychologists should understand that equality does not mean sameness, work to eliminate discrimination, be aware of intersectionality, and balance their own lives in order to teach others about creating balance for theirs. Reciprocity is essentially the universe returns to the doer that which is done. Reciprocity means having a deeper appreciation of why there is a balance in the universe in the first place. So without north and south poles being positive and negative electromagnetic forces, the universe couldn't exist as we know it today. So psychologists can focus on doing what is best for community, for humanity, sharing successes and gains in a way that benefit the community, and then investing themselves in organizations and groups that can also further contribute to the community. Justice is the process by which Mott is restored when harmony, order, or balance have been disrupted. So Mott justice is restorative justice. It's not justice to punish a wrongdoer, but it's justice to make right that which was wrong. So psychologists do not participate in activities that result in destruction, injury to selves, or injury to the community of Black people. Psychologists should promote and protect growth and development of other Black psychologists, maintain good character, accept wise counsel, and then offer counsel to those who do wrong, um, in order to create reconciliation.
Next, we're going to talk about the procedures for filing and resolving complaints within the association. Revisions to this section were made in 2019. All formal complaints are assessed by the association's ethics committee. The general theme of their approach to conflict resolution is a move toward a model of reconciliation and justice. They state, the objective is not always to find fault or to lay blame, but rather to determine if there are agreeable solutions that can allow all parties to feel that their concerns have been addressed, and that the same or similar offense should not occur in the future. This slide provides an overview of the conflict resolution process. The code is broken up into 5 primary sections that address reporting concerns, complaint review, appeals, dispositions, and providing feedback. Anyone, regardless of whether they are a member of ABPSI or not, can report a concern to the ethics committee about an individual member, the organization as a whole, or one of its affiliates. To submit a concern, they can contact an ethics member directly or submit an ethical violation complaint form. Their concern is then directed to a neutral person on the committee who can answer questions and keep everyone informed as to what stage of the process they are at and their options. This person is called the process navigator. Confidentiality will be maintained throughout the process until the disposition stage for some cases, because some of these may lend themselves to public disclosure. Confidentiality will also be broken given state-mandated reporting laws. All complaint documentation will be retained, and all participants can track their complaint online or by speaking to their process navigator. After the formal complaint has been made, the ethics committee will review it during the next meeting led by one of the co-chairs. After discussing the complaint, they will attempt to reach a consensus on what needs to be done to rectify the problem, which is done by majority vote. They will then present this to those involved. If the party is not satisfied with the committee's decision, they can choose to hold a committee hearing via video conference during the next meeting. These usually occur within 2 weeks to 1 month. They can also opt to have an in-person hearing during one of the semi-annual meetings or conventions, usually in January, March, July, or August. And during these in-person meetings, both members of the complaint party may elect to bring an advocate with them. If the issue is broad in scope or impact, the committee may propose that the topic be addressed during a community imbongi at the annual convention. This is essentially a community problem-solving meeting. If, up to this point, either party is unsatisfied with the outcome, they can submit an appeal to the Council of Elders. The elders have the final word on the matter. The code does not discuss how elders are chosen or which elders make this final decision. There are 15 different formal resolutions that can occur as a result of the complaint. These are separated into 5 categories shown here: dismissal or no action taken, self-directed dispositions, guided dispositions, dispositions related to membership and disclosure, and organization-based resolutions. Some examples of resolutions include ordering a cease and desist letter for the behavior, monitoring of the individual who made the infraction, engaging in education or counseling, giving back to the community, being placed on probation, or suspension of membership. Because this list is quite long, I'll leave you to take a look at these in the code itself. You'll find them starting on page 30. And we'll provide you with a link at the end of this presentation where you can see the revisions to the 2019 Ethics Code. And lastly, all parties will be asked to complete a feedback survey designed to help the committee with identifying helpful aspects of the process, as well as opportunities for improvement.
Okay, so Ash already went over the principles earlier, so now I'm just going to briefly talk about how they are similar or different from APA's general principles. We really just focused on the general principles from each code, as those are more overarching and a bit easier to compare than individual standards are. On the surface, just looking at the principles together, like on the screen, it really seems as though they only have one principle in common, which would be justice. However, if you really look at the definitions that are outlined in each code, there are some major similarities between them, even though they use different words, with slightly different interpretations as well. So integrity, according to APA, means that psychologists seek to promote accuracy, honesty, and truthfulness in the science, teaching, and practice of psychology. So in these activities, psychologists do not steal, cheat, or engage in fraud or intentional misrepresentation of fact. On the other hand, truth, according to ABPSI, means that truth calls for some degree of correspondence between what is presented and some underlying reality. So ultimately, our goal is not to bring others necessarily to one perspective, but really to foster a context that leads everyone to be better able to discern what may or may not be true. So ABPSI also has these declarations of commitment, which apply these principles and standards in a really concrete way. And so some example statements around truth from those declarations include things like, I will be truthful, I am honest, I will not be deceitful, and I will not close my mind to the truth. So both APA and ABPSI really emphasize honesty, truthfulness, and accuracy in these two principles. Next, respect for people's rights and dignity, according to APA, really means that psychologists respect the dignity and worth of all people and the rights of individuals to privacy, confidentiality, and self-determination. So psychologists are aware that special safeguards may be necessary to protect the rights and welfare of persons or communities whose vulnerabilities impair that autonomous decision-making. Similarly, propriety, according to ABPSI, is doing the appropriate thing at the proper time. So what started out really as this golden rule of treat other people the way we want to be treated, has kind of morphed into treating others not as we would want to be treated, but really to learn enough about them to learn how they would want to be treated and how to always treat them with high regard and deep respect. So some example statements from the Declaration of Commitment around this would include, I always try to do what is right. I will not mistreat those who are less fortunate. I will not hurt others. I will practice generosity in my words and deeds. Yeah, and so both codes really highlight the idea of respect and doing what is right. Lastly, justice, according to APA, means that psychologists recognize that fairness and justice entitle all persons to access to and benefit from the contributions of psychology and to equal quality in the processes, procedures, and services being conducted by psychologists. ABPSI, though, defines justice as the process by which balance is restored when harmony has been disrupted, order and balance have been disturbed, and impropriety is introduced. So this injustice kind of creates this imbalance, which then must be restored through reciprocity. And so the goal is really to make right what is wrong. So some example statements include, I will not turn a blind eye to injustice. I will never falsely accuse anyone. I will observe the law. I will not close my mind to the truth. And I will not distort the truth. So even though these two codes are really using the same word, which is justice, they are still interpreted differently depending on the association. But overall, they really are getting at similar principles here, and they both really kind of emphasize the maintaining balance, fairness, and overall justice. Among the other principles as well, there is a decent amount of overlap, but they don't necessarily map onto each other very neatly. Both sets of codes do emphasize, doing no harm and taking steps to benefit the client and putting client's needs first. And they both highlight not overstepping bounds of competence, and also that we should all be doing what is right, following the law, and constantly learning from past experiences. In terms of where they may differ a bit though, ABPSI has more principles, so naturally it covers a bit more ground maybe than APA's general principles, but they emphasize harmony and balance specifically that felt pretty different. So harmony is defined as a law of nature. So it's required in maintaining true, correct alignment with our true selves, our higher purpose, and the attending responsibilities of becoming self-actualizing beings. So in that, psychologists also strive for harmony as we seek to create this moral, just, and balanced society that values the diversity of cultural ingredients that now make up the ABPSI, communities, and the world, and understands the need to discover how we can best work together. So some example statements from this would be, I will avoid becoming unreasonably angry. I will not let myself become hot-tempered. I will not speak with anger or arrogance, and I will not place myself or my group above others. And then there is balance, which is more about learning how to establish and maintain really balance between opposing elements in society through an awareness and appreciation of counterbalancing forces, which is key to creating a just society. And so balance is maintained when we attend to all of our responsibilities to the extent needed. So some example statements from this would be, I will take care not to overstep my boundaries. I will not place myself or my group above others, and I will seek to fulfill my obligation to that which is greater than me. So this one, it's a little bit different, but it does remind me of that competence piece that we talk about a lot, and how sometimes we feel like it should be a general principle in APA and it's just not, but it's always relevant, it's always important. So I feel like that's touched on a little bit more there. So again, there are parts here that we find in APA, such as respecting diversity and attending to responsibilities to the extent needed. But the wording and the full interpretation of these principles is a little bit different just depending on which code you are looking at. So I'm going to pass it on over to Vanna.
The APA and ABPSI in some ways are very similar organizations, but differ in many aspects. For example, one of the ways in which APA and ABPSI are similar is that both organizations are dedicated to the use of psychology to make social change. The mission of APA is to promote the advancement, communication, and application of psychological science and knowledge to benefit society and improve lives, whereas the mission of ABPSI is the liberation of the African mind, empowerment of the African character, and enlivenment and illumination of the African spirit. Both the mission statements of these organizations are reflected in their ethical code of conduct. Specifically, the APA Code of Ethics states, psychologists are committed to increasing scientific and professional knowledge of behavior and people's understanding of themselves and others to use of such knowledge to improve the conditions of individuals, organizations, and society. Psychologists respect and protect civil and human rights and the importance of freedom of inquiry and expression in research, teaching, and publication. Comparatively, the AB-PSI Ethical Standards of Black Psychologists. The objective of a Black psychologist is to restore the Black mind to its original form, prior to the intrusion of slavery, by cultivating the integrity, the dignity, the collective awareness, and the unified movement of Black people towards their social, political, economic, psychological, and spiritual liberation. AB-PSI's guiding principle for the ethical code of Black psychologists is informed by the ontological principle of consubstantiation. In other words, we are one people, we are the same essence. The primary differences between APA and AB-PSI is that APA reflects Eurocentric values, whereas AB-PSI is more reflective of the Afrocentric values. Morrison Bloom states that AB-PSI made it clear that their ethical guidelines were rooted in Afrocentric values and reflects the historical trauma and psychological consequences of slavery and discrimination experienced by African Americans. Thus, their model of ethics is centered on healing through valuing collective community responsibility. For AB-PSI and other ethnic communities potentially, the Eurocentric values of the APA Code of Ethics, particularly self-focused individualism and personal autonomy, are not inclusive of their Afrocentric values or considers the historical trauma of slavery and discrimination. Therefore, the APA Code of Ethics needs to be more inclusive of themes such as centered on community. The Association of Black Psychologists, founded in 1968, was the first national psychological association. AB-PSI is organized specifically for charitable and educational purposes that is intended to promote and advance the Black community and other ethnic groups. Black psychologists have been trailblazers within the field of psychology by broadening the approach to mental health services. For example, the Association of Black Psychologists pioneered the area of cultural competence, which includes social justice, cultural psychology, and multicultural competencies. Additionally, they create a framework for self-help model for community healing, as well as advocated against systemic issues such as the death penalty and war on drugs. In the following slides, we have taken directly some of the ethical standards from the AB-PSI Ethical Standards of Black Psychologists that we think can be applied in our work, whether that is clinical or research, particularly when working with the Black community. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation.